Now that Renacita is coming to a close, I felt it appropriate to do one last swan song towards the region. Renacita gave us a ton of characters, some of which were obviously going to be better than others. So in this video, I'm going to go past each character and put them into a tier list in terms of their value. Now, what does value even mean? I have 3 factors to decide what a character's value is. First of all, team flexibility. What team flexibility means is if you're a DPS, are you capable of using 4-star supports or multiple other supports that are not your best in slot to a good degree? And if you're a support, are you competitive with the main DPS's best in slot teams, or are you even just their best in slot? The second point is performance in tower and wuwa, which just speak for itself. And then the third point is dependence on additional 5-star pulls. For example, if you're a DPS, how much do you need a specific 5-star support? And if you're a support, do you work with any 4-stars or do you require a 5-star DPS to be good? As for my baseline assumptions, I'm going to assume every single character on this tier list is S0 R1. Obviously, not everyone pulls for signatures, but I feel quite safe assuming that most people do. So that's going to be my assumption for this list. Additionally, I would like to add that these rankings are without the release of Linné and Mornier in mind. We simply do not have access to these characters yet, so we're not able to see how much these characters will increase each character's performance in practice. So keep in mind, these ratings are without the existence of Linné and Mornier. So with that out of the way, I think it's time for me to finally start actually talking about the characters, starting off with D tier. Now, to be a D tier character is to be a character I believe no one should ever pull for, and is simply not worth it. It doesn't matter what your account looks like, there's almost always going to be a better investment for your account. And there's only one character within the D tier, which is Rochia. Now, Rochia she sure is a character, because she does have teams. It's not that she doesn't have teams she works with, but it's basically never worth it to pull a Rochia for those teams. If you're trying to pull Rochia for your Camellia, sure, that works, but you're almost always going to be better off simply getting sequences for that Camellia instead and just using Sanhua. That's almost always going to be a better plan than trying to invest into a Rochia. Then there's Flova team, in which case she is in fact the second best in slot. But why would you ever pull Rochia for your Flova team when you could also pull Choyuan, who has more use cases and is just overall a better investment? Because while Rochia only has the Flova team realistically, Choyuan also has the Gelbrena team. Choyuan also is not as reliant on his signature weapon to be a good pull for the team. So overall, there's just no reason to really pull Rochia. The only team she is theoretically best in slot in is a team where she is less than a 5% increase assuming she has her signature. So yeah, just don't pull for Rochia. Then next up is the C tier. These are the characters that are generally not worth going for unless you fulfill specific conditions on your account, starting off with Chisa. Now, people are going to find this very controversial that I put Chisa this low, and to a degree, I understand that. It's because she is in fact the best in slot character with the best Tower of Adversity DPS in the game, which is Cartethyia. But here's the issue. Arrow Rover is nearly the same in terms of performance, and Chisa requires her signature weapon to actually beat Arrow Rover within a Cartethyia team. Chisa simply just isn't really a good pull for your Cartethyia, because she kind of falls into the Rochia syndrome with Camellia, where you could theoretically pull for Chisa, but it's just going to be worse than getting Cartethyia sequences, because every single one of Cartethyia sequences is going to be a bigger increase than pulling for Chisa. She's being entirely carried into the C tier by the fact that Cartethyia is just a better character than Camellia is, which means she is saved from the fates that I have given to Rochia. Then next up within the C tier is Zani. And honestly, I don't think I need to really say much. She is a very strong DPS if you have her full team, but here's the thing. If you skipped out on Phoebe, then this character just isn't going to perform. There's a pretty good chance that if you aren't doing quick swap nonsense, you're most likely not going to be able to get a 3-star clear with Azani if you don't have Phoebe, because the new tower stages are just simply harder, and Zani loses way too much from not having Phoebe on her team. I don't think I need to go into much detail on why Zani is so reliant on Phoebe as a character to be worth pulling. And if you for any reason doubt this statement, whenever someone asks if they should pull Zani on their account, the first question that everyone always asks is, do you have Phoebe? And that speaks volumes. Simply not having Phoebe is such a large downgrade to Zani, to where I can't realistically place her in a higher tier than C. She has no team flexibility and she very much depends on an additional 5-star pull. This means the only thing she's got going for her is her performance in Tower and wuwa, neither of which she is top tier in, so to C she goes. And then the final character within the C tier is Cantarella. Cantarella is at the top of C tier for one very simple reason. The character that she works with is Flova, and Flova is absolutely stupid busted. Flova is in my opinion the best DPS in the game, so being very good with the best DPS in the game gets you some brownie points. However, I realistically can't put Cantarella much higher than this. She very much depends on you having Cantarella to actually be worth having. Cantarella's energy regeneration is so bad that she actively increases the energy regen needs of your main DPS. This usually leads to a significant loss in damage output, meaning Cantarella doesn't really have the flexibility. I am convinced the only reason they made Flova not use energy is because if she did use energy, Cantarella would be griefing her. So ultimately, I think that while you could argue for a B tier placement because Flova is just so powerful, I believe that she should deserve this C tier. And that brings us to the B tier. The primary characteristic of being a B tier character is while you are strong in your optimal scenario, you have some things holding you back from truly being exceptional in terms of value. Starting with Choyuan, and you can already see where this is going. Choyuan is a strong character, being best in slot within two very strong main DPS teams, those being Galbrenna and Flova. Galbrenna is one of the best Tower of Adversity DPSs, and Flova is one of the strongest DPSs period. So why does he only get a B tier? Well, it's because of two reasons. First of all, his team flexibility is rather limited, because outside of Galbrenna and Flova, Choyuan kinda just doesn't really have any teams. Because both of the main DPS characters he works with, he loses out heavily on the depends on other 5 stars category. And because he is a sub DPS, I'm willing to give him some slack on the team flexibility, because being a sub DPS who's best in slot in 2 top tier teams is rather impressive. But still, 2 teams is not a whole lot. He's also not vital for these characters to work. Flova has plenty of options in the form of Havoc Rover, Donjin, Booling, or Shorekeeper, and Galbrenna can very easily pivot into a monofusion team. So while Choyuan does have his use cases, he ultimately is not that strong of a pull on his own, which is why he gets the bottom of B tier. Next up is Phoebe. Phoebe is a character that very heavily wins on team flexibility, depending on how you look at her. Phoebe has a ton of teams if you're trying to run her as a main DPS. She has entirely free teams like Sanhua Spectra Rover, more premium teams like Shikona Shorekeeper, is able to use strong characters like Flova, etc. A main DPS Phoebe has a ton of team options, and a pretty good amount of her teams have a ton of free-to-play characters, meaning that she very much does not depend on other 5-star pulls. Team flexibility is yet another category where Phoebe does excel, because as you have heard, she has plenty of main DPS teams, and then she can also be used as a sub DPS for Zani, meaning that even if you pull Phoebe as a main DPS and then eventually get a Zani, Phoebe still isn't entirely worthless. So why is she in B tier? Well, it's entirely the performance in Tower and wuwa aspect, because here's the thing. Phoebe as a main DPS is by no means a top tier pull. It will service you, and it will be able to clear all the content for you. It's just that there's a lot of characters who are able to do it more efficiently than her. So ultimately, Phoebe is one of those characters where it's very nice if you like the character and just want to play Phoebe for Phoebe, but if you're trying to make an optimal account, Phoebe is simply not the character you're going to turn to. The next character I'm going to talk about is Carlotta. Now, first of all, let's talk about her performance in TOA and wuwa, because I feel that's going to be the most interesting part of Carlotta. Her performance in Tower ever since her release has been very strong, and this is still the case. If you're playing her in her best in slot team, Carlotta is consistently going to be getting you good results, which is very good and is kind of the primary reason she's up here into the B tier. But where she falters is Whimpering Wastes. Whimpering Wastes is a game mode that heavily values your ability to do consistent damage throughout your entire rotation. But because Carlotta focuses so much of her damage into a 5 to 6 damage burst damage window, this is simply not going to be the game mode for her. Combining this with the fact that most of her damage output is in a straight line, it means that she requires good positioning to actually get good scores within the game mode. So ultimately, she gets a middling performance when you look at both tower and wuwa. The next up is team flexibility, which is a little strange, because while she does have alternative options that are Jeju, they do end up losing a pretty good amount of damage for her. Brant is a good option, but it loses a pretty good amount of performance. Same for Yang Ying and Taocha. So ultimately, I can't give her anything but a middling score on team flexibility and dependence on additional 5-star pulls, which means that her being in the middle of the pack of the entire list is honestly rather fitting. Now we get onto Galbrenna, who is basically just a strict upgrade over Carlotta in this entire list. Her performance in Tower and wuwa is just that little bit better. Her team flexibility is also just a little better, because her within the Mono Fusion team is a lot closer to the Choyuwen team than Carlotta's Brand team is to her Jeju team. And then as for the dependence on additional 5-star pulls, well, she does depend a little more on 5-star because of characters like Lupa and Choyuwen, but still, she has enough baseline strength to where characters like Mortefi are able to get her decent results. Whereas with Carlotta's lower baseline strength, while she loses less on a technicality, she's still going to be weaker with 4-star teammates than Galbrenna is. For the rest, the most of the things that I said about Carlotta do kinda stay true about Galbrenna. She's excellent within Tower of Adversity, but she's kind of middling in Whimpering Wastes. She has better than Carlotta in both of these modes, but not by much, which is why she's just one spot higher on the tier list. And that brings us to the final character within the B tier, which is Cartethyiawuwa. If we were to give these characters ratings within the tier, Cartethyia would get a B+, because she is the most likely to be elevated to A tier. However, let me explain why she's in the B tier in the first place. Cartethyia is the epitome of a character that's being carried entirely in one category. Because team flexibility? Where is the team flexibility? She only has the Area Erosion team, and trying to deviate from this will be a massive loss in performance. As for dependence on additional 5-star pulls, she really wants that Shikona. While Chisa's release has lessened the need for Shikona by allowing you to run Arrow Rover and Chisa together, it's still to a point where I am not really willing to give Cartethyia any props in this department. Not like I gave to Phoebe, at least. And that leaves us with the performance in Tower and wuwa argument, which, in wuwa, she's fine. She's not by any means exemplary, but she is fine. She has good grouping, decent AoE, and a large amount of damage output. She's not going to be some kind of top tier character in here, but she's doing her job, and that's all she needs to do. In Tower, however, she's just bar none the best, and that is the single reason she's this high up. While other characters might be middling in some categories, Cartethyia decided to put all of her stat points into Tower performance, and let's just say it's working out for her pretty well. I doubt I really need to explain much more than this. She's the bar none best DPS in Tower of Adversity, while kind of just being lacking in every other category. So B+ it is. Which gets us into the A tier. The primary character of an A tier character within this tier list is going to be very much succeeding in at least 2 of the 3 categories. Which starts us off with Shikona, whose biggest flex is her team flexibility and her performance in both Tower and wuwa. Because Shikona does have quite a lot of teams. She's best in slot with basically every single Arrow DPS at the current moment. She's the best in slot with GN through the GN team, she's best in slot for Cartethyia because she's an Area Erosion focused DPS, and she's the best in slot with because all of the Liberation damage buffers kinda just are mediocre, which means that Shikona's generalist arrow damage buffs are going to be the best bet for a DPS team. So her biggest win is absolutely her team flexibility. Now what about the characters she works with and how vital she is to them? Like I said before, she is vital to Cartethyia, and she is the best Tower of Adversity DPS in the entire game. She has a large increase for DPS which is also a very solid team. And she's also very much a big part of the glue that holds the Mono Arrow GN team together. So she is vital to every single team she is in. And these teams are also pretty strong. When we look at Whimpering Wastes, the performance of her teams do fall off a bit, but still, you can't really give her too much flack for how many teams she's best in slot in. Having 3 teams where she's the best character is rather impressive. She does have a rather big dependence on additional 5-star pulls because every single team she works in does require a 5-star DPS. But Honestly, that's kinda the only category where she majorly fails, which is why she is at the bottom of the A tier. And that brings us to Brant. Brant's team flexibility works in a different way of Shakona. Where Shakona is best in slot in a bunch of teams, Brant is a really powerful option in a larger amount of teams. Where Shakona is good with every single arrow character, Brant is good with every single fusion and skill damage character. This gives him a far bigger roster of characters to work with, but makes him a lot less vital to the teams he is in. He works with characters from Changli to Encore to Jinchi to Carlotta. He really isn't lacking when it comes to characters who synergize with him. And it's made better by the fact that he has his very own main DPS team with Lupa and Shorekeeper. Main DPS Brant, while it isn't as strong as the dedicated main DPS teams of the version, is still a very solid DPS team that allows you to pull for Brant while not really having a main DPS that he works well with. This team does get a very large upgrade with Lupa, however, and I do recommend getting Lupa if you want to play main DPS Brant. However, Sanhua is still an option. So he excels in team flexibility and is rather middling when it comes to dependence on additional 5-star pulls. But how is his performance? His performance within his best teams is generally lower than Shakona within Tower of Adversity due to Shakona's ability to be run with characters like Cartethyia. However, when we look at Whimpering Wastes, Brant tends to do better. Because of Brant's large damage output, he is able to succeed when it comes to the criteria of having constant damage output in Whimpering Wastes. So ultimately, Brant is usually going to be performing better, especially if you're running something like a mono fusion team that features Changli, Brant, and Lupa, where every single character in the team does a very large amount of damage. This team is going to be a lot better than, say, a Cartethyia Shakona team. So in terms of team flexibility and performance in endgame, Shakona and Brant do match, but I think Brant is a lot less dependent on additional 5-star pulls due to his ability to run himself as a main DPS rather decently. And that brings us to the next character within the A tier, which is going to be Brant's partner in crime, Lupa. Almost every single character that I described Brant working in, Lupa is also going to be a good option. While Lupa doesn't really have the synergy with skill damage dealers that Brant does, she trades this for being omega laser focused in the fusion damage niche. The sheer existence of Lupa forced Kuro Games to give Choyuan more mechanics in his kit, and to give Galbrenna mechanics that rely on Choyuan, simply because otherwise Choyuan would not be the best in slot character for Galbrenna. So let me put this into perspective. Lupa is so powerful that they had to actively give Galbrenna more Choyuan reliant mechanics, just so Choyuan would be her actual best in slot. That should tell you enough about how strong Lupa is. She just has so many buffs that make her viable with every single fusion DPS character. And because of how many buffs she has, it's very unlikely she's going to be replaced the way people might end up replacing Shakona within some arrow DPS teams. So overall, while her team flexibility is a bit less than Brant, she is a lot more needed within the teams that she actually does run, which means I believe that she is better in this aspect. When it comes to dependence on additional 5-star pulls, sure, you're gonna want a fusion DPS. But guess what? There's one on the standard banner called Encore, and Lupa is very powerful for Encore, which means that Lupa isn't entirely dependent on additional 5-star pulls. She also has the performance in both Tower and wuwa. Monofusion Changli is one of the best team comps within Whimpering Wastes, and Monofusion Galbrenna is one of the best team comps within Tower of Adversity. So Lupa very much deserves her placement within the A tier. Next up, I would like to talk about Yuno. Now, Yuno is one of those characters that is very good in 2 categories, but is lacking a little bit in one other. Team flexibility is absolutely one of her strongest suits. Because of how generalist her outro skill is, she is destined to work with every single heavy attack DPS character in the entire game. Obviously, she was made for Augusta, but this doesn't stop her from being good with characters like Phoebe or Zani. She's also the best in slot support for GN, while also being a strong main DPS herself. So team flexibility is absolutely one of her strongest suits. Next up, the performance in TOA and wuwa. Her performance in Tower is absolutely exemplary. Obviously, she's the best in slot support for a top tier DPS in the form of Augusta, while also being the reason that Augusta is so strong within Whimpering Wastes. And this definitely can also be attributed to Augusta, but Yuno definitely plays a part with her large personal damage, allowing her to clear more waves of her own. Dependence on additional 5-star pulls is a category that Yuno finds herself struggling in a bit more, however. Because For her performance in Wuthering Wastes, she does strongly rely on Augusta, and almost every single DPS that she works well with is in fact a 5-star DPS, so she does lose out a bit in this category. But overall, I do still believe she is worth the A tier. Next up is going to be Augusta. Now, Augusta is a character that gets a lot of props in a category that we really haven't seen much benefit from yet, being the dependence on additional 5-star pulls. Most characters in this tier have been pretty okay in this department. The best performance we've seen in the A tier so far is Lupa, who does still get a pretty decent downgrade from running Encore over someone like Galbrenna. But Augusta is the first character to truly excel in this category within the A tier, simply because Mortefi is kind of just the GOAT. While Yuno is in fact Augusta's best in slot, Augusta just kinda doesn't really need her that much. Mortefi is close enough to the point where you can very comfortably skip Yuno and just get Augusta on her own. So ultimately, I think she definitely excels within the category of dependence on additional 5-star pulls. When it comes to performance in TOA, in both her Mortefi and her Yuno team, she is very powerful within Tower, being one of the top tiers. When it comes to Wuthering Wastes, while the Mortefi team is decent, with the Yuno team she starts performing very admirably, being better than most DPSs in the game. I would argue that the only teams that are arguably better than Augusta Yuno within Wuthering Wastes are Monofusion Changli or any Filova team. And even then, I believe that Augusta Yuno is stronger than Monofusion Changli, so she's got performance in both game modes down as well. As for team flexibility, she doesn't really win in this department because she doesn't have a lot of teammates she wants to use. But the reason for this isn't because she doesn't have the options, it's because there's 2 options she has that there's just no reason to run anything else. If you're looking for a 5-star teammate, you're just gonna go for Yuno. And if you don't have Yuno, you're gonna go for Mortefi, who is a 4-star. There's really no reason to go beyond Mortefi when it comes to supports, because Mortefi's a 4-star. So technically Augusta does synergize with characters like Yinlin or Filova, but there's really no reason to pull them out ever, because of Mortefi being a 4-star character. So I would argue that Augusta succeeds in every single category here. And that finally gets us into the S tier, which only has one character. As you can imagine, the S tier is for the characters who are just always worth pulling, and I don't see a scenario in which they are a bad pull. They excel in every single category and doesn't seemingly have a weakness, and that character is of course Filova. So let's go by the categories one by one. First of all, team flexibility. She has her best in slot team of Cantarella Cherrywen, but is easily able to pivot into characters like Donjin, Havoc Rover, or Rochia. So she definitely has enough teams as a main DPS to get by. But she also has teams where she functions more of a sub DPS than a main DPS, like for example Phoebe, GN, or Augusta. So if her ability to work with 4-star and free characters was not admirable enough, she also has her sub DPS teams if you're tired of running her as a main DPS. So in team flexibility, she absolutely wins here. When it comes to performance in both TOA and WUA, she also got this in the bag, because she is, well, remember when I said Cartethyiawuwa was bar none the best Tower of Adversity DPS? Filova's like that with Wuthering Wastes, but even more dominant. Somehow. And also has top tier performance in Tower. Yeah. She's got this, bro. She's got this. Like, there's really nothing I can say other than this category, she's got it in the bag. And then when it comes to dependence on additional 5-star pulls, while her best in slot teammates are in fact 5-star characters, she definitely does not need these characters to succeed. Like I said, she can easily run with characters like Donjin, Havoc Rover, Verena, or Bu Ling, or Shorekeeper. She has plenty of options that aren't Cantarella and Chao Yuen. So ultimately, in this category, she's also a winner. Filova is just the bar none highest value character within Arena Sita. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Additionally, if you have any questions, you should join my Discord server, which is linked in the description down below. If you just want to see more of me, you can check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. I don't post very often, but when I do, it's just kind of what I'm passionate about. But that'll be all from me. Peace.